Oh, that's okay. Shalom, everyone. Shalom. Take a seat so we can get
See
started.
if anybody else is coming in, see if anybody's walking in the door.
That's okay.
Might take a-
Well, I'll go on. Shalom, shalom, and I'm doing slow speed. You know that, take for instance, and let's give it up for Eric. Okay, what Eric archives and records in all of our services, you actually could change the speed of the service. Do you know that? Yeah, there's a thing on playback that you can actually change the speed of the service to faster or slower. Because every day there's a program which we could get into someday. It's not easy to say the least. You have to be really meshuggah, I guess, called Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi, a daf is a page of Talmud, Yomi a day. And there are approximately 6,000 pages in Daf Yomi, so figure out how many years that takes to finish the entire Talmud. It's huge. And I've come to like, there's a teacher, Eli Stefansky, Stefansky, who's a, hey, Norm, come on in, go Brooklyn Dodgers, they're out of business. Norman has a Brooklyn Dodgers cap and it ain't gonna help. Garnished help him. But anyway, is that the class is an hour every day. But as he points out, if you don't have time to listen for the hour, you can make the class 45 minutes by just speeding up my voice. And he really says that. And I said, what? And you actually pointed out one day how on your playback mechanism on your phones, you're actually able to speed up or slow up a recording, which I think is pretty interesting. Anyway, wonderful to see all of you back. Some of you I didn't see last week. What?
Turn off the phone.
Okay, thank you. As Janice is saying quietly, she did say, please make sure your phones are off. I thank Linda for being the sign-in monitor. I thank Janice for being the pages monitor. If you didn't get a page when you came on, there are 2 pages in the back there. Norman, how's Carol?
Good.
Okay, good. Okay, we got that out of the way. Okay. I love him. Okay, so anyway, I am very excited about today. I always get excited about teaching, even though I've been here teaching since 9:30, I think, this morning. I was lost actually. But I'm very, hi, Nushki. Hi, Shoshana. Okay. Anyway, is that to describe, and going back to last week, in Judaism, to describe who God is. First of all, the question of who God is, what God is, where God is, when God is. Oh, that's the 5 W's of a journalist, right? Yeah, all right. The 5 W's, right? Where, what, when, and whatever. How's the H? So I don't know how that works. But anyway, or how God is, whatever, are all where up here. And as you hopefully came away with a little bit from last week, that really the biblical sense of God, I'll put it that way, is experiential. And that if you were to meet, let's say, King David, and who is God to you? How would you describe God? If he was going into battle, which King David did, as all kings do, well, God was, as actually Moses described God in the Song of the Sea in Exodus, Ish Milchama, God is like a man of war. So that's what you want God for, to get you into battle. And on the other hand, of course, the beautiful Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. For King David, assuming he wrote the 23rd Psalm, which is another discussion, and that is that God is like a shepherd. And what is a shepherd? A shepherd is one who watches over, takes care of you, makes sure you're going in the right direction. If you're straying, get back, okay? So it's really experiential. So now moving into the rabbinic period. Now, let me give you an idea in terms of time what I'm talking about, these periods here, is that, well, obviously, this coming Shabbat, we start with creation. So whenever creation was, whatever, 6 billion, whatever, okay. But let's take Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, assuming that they were actual real personalities. And I only say that it's not heresy, although an Orthodox rabbi would never question this, obviously. If it says in the Torah is the emes, remember how those of you know Yiddish, the emes means the emet, the truth, okay? The emes, it's the emes, like the shmach, is so beautiful. However, mamish, no, that's the other, it's mamish, okay. But anyway, the fact is what? that, yeah. The fact is that let's assume Abraham was around 2500 BCE. Some most scholars agree if they're going to give a date to Abraham. And the earliest parts of the Bible bring us somewhere down to 350 or so BCE, which would be the beginning of the Greek period of Alexander the Great. So 2300, 300, almost 2000 years of history is in the Bible. That's a lot, okay? And therefore, we are influenced by many, many civilizations, which, just like today, it's amazing how a country, a piece of land the size of the state of New Jersey, almost every civilization in humankind, including today, wants that piece of land. It's absolutely amazing. And today, the location of that land is not as critical as it was in earlier times, because obviously, going from Europe to get to Africa, or even to get to the Far East, you have to go through that piece of land up this way or this way. Okay, it was amazing. The Mesopotamian road, as it was called. Anyway, that's that. So today we're going to be looking at, so to speak, in a small way, because the challenge of a class like this is doing this all in an hour and approximately an hour and a half. A real challenge, to say the least. However, the fact is the rabbinic period basically is from the 1st century of the Common Era, so now 300 years later, okay, going somewhere to, let's say, the 6th century, so from the 100s through the 500s of the Common Era. It's a relatively short period of time compared to the biblical one, obviously. However, the world had changed greatly, and obviously, most desperately, with obviously the Roman Empire, and the destruction of the Roman Empire by the Holy Christian Empire. And those of you who remember way back when, remember history, okay, in school, right? Junior high, middle school, whatever it was called. Okay. So anyway, that's the first period I'm going to be talking about, generally speaking. And then I'm going to take us into the world of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism, which will be very challenging. It's very difficult to say as when Kabbalah began, because there were rabbis who practiced some form of what we call Jewish mysticism. And that is, remember going back to last week, the great challenge of the Bible and all religions is there is the transcendent God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Oh, that's pretty scary.
Whoa.
Boy, wow. I could be in a fun house, right? Okay. That's the transcendent God. But then there is the God that in our Bible that Elijah met in the cleft in the rock of Mount Carmel when he was frightened to death because he thought, remember I mentioned this, that Ahab and Jezebel, the queen and king of Israel at that time, were trying to kill him, which they were. And God appeared to him still small. Okay. So the fact is, how does that, what is that? Can God be out there? And yes, because God is where? Shema Yisrael. God is what? Echad. God is everywhere, but not everywhere. Everywhere, inwhere, every inwhere, and every outwhere, and every underwear. Okay, God is everywhere. Okay, it has to be. If God is there, God is everywhere, right? Okay. So this becomes the great challenge that the rabbis had to deal with, because remember, the rabbis who, and brief history again, in the year 70 of the Common Era, the Holy Temple, the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. So all of a sudden, every part of our religious life focused on that place. All of a sudden, there was a group of scholars, we'll call them scholars, and who were already doing things, studying Torah, thinking about these things. There were, by the way, there were many other hundreds of writings prior to the Talmud, going back probably to the 2nd and 3rd centuries BCE, 300 years before what I'm talking about now. Following me? Okay. However, the fact is all of a sudden these rabbis had a great challenge. How do we create a Judaism when the temple in Jerusalem has been destroyed? I don't know how many of you saw the great movie. I thought it was pretty cool, called Independence Day. Modern movie where I forget who it was. Not the alien. Was it the aliens or the aliens? Yeah. We're going to destroy the White House. Okay. And obviously, thank God they didn't. But you can imagine if those terrorists on 9/11 actually were able to send a plane. Actually, I think they did they were going to send the plane into the White House, but they sent it into the Pentagon. And imagine if, God forbid, if the White House were destroyed, that's the symbol of, Linda, yes. I think there's anything to say about this. You're supposed to go to the White House, right? But, oh, that's right, right. Because the other one went down, the Pentagon was specific for the Pentagon, right? So the fact is, if right. Yeah, yes, we know. Thank you. But the fact is, thank you, but thank you for reminding me that one was supposed to go into the White House. Now, the White House, forget the damage or people in there, etc., would have died, but what the symbol is, so that when that temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, and it was a symbol of the house of God, the central focus of all of Jewish life for thousands of years before that. After all, King David, who built much the initial parts, the earlier parts of the temple in Jerusalem, the whole area up there was approximately 1000 BCE. Okay, now we're talking about 60 of the Common Era, so 1600 years later, 1060 years later. Okay, not 1600. But the fact is that the rabbis had to say, what are we going to do now? Do we close up shop and say, okay, Judaism is kaput? Or do we recreate Judaism, which they did in a credible way? Which meant they also had to what? Recreate and continue our belief in whom? God. Okay, that was their challenge. So what did they have to work with? They couldn't simply say, okay, this is the new idea. We got a new idea, because new ideas don't work out, okay? Because people will say, where'd you get that from? God spoke to you? Get out of here. God speak to you? God spoke to Rabbi Moss, but that was in the backyard raking my leaves. But that's beside the point. Okay, you can't go around saying God spoke to you. Most people can't anyway. But the fact is, therefore, they had to take the concepts that were already there in Judaism and remold them, which was really the genius of the hundreds, maybe thousands of rabbis that were in place when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. So let's look at the first page here, which says God is viewed in the Rabbinic period. Okay. A central statement of Jewish faith, of course, the Shema is recited daily. The book of Deuteronomy describes oneness and exclusivity. So therefore, guess what? If you want to say, well, what do the rabbis believe in? God believed in, God is one. Okay. Shema, Yisrael, Adonai, Echad. Okay. There were other peoples, not Jews, but there were other groups at this time, 2,000 years ago, who believed in more than one God. There were Gnostics, there were Sectarians, there were Karaites, different types of groups of Jews who believed in more than one God. A little sidetrack, so to speak, but it's cute. Some of you might have heard me say this already. If you were to go to some Orthodox and more traditional synagogues on Shabbat or holidays, holy days, when they come to the word Echad, they emphasize the dalet at the end, and they'll say Echad, something like that. Okay, really emphasize it very strongly. The reason that's a tradition is because for those of you who know Hebrew, if you take the word Aleph, Chet, Resh. Now, a Resh, for those of you who know Hebrew, looks very similar to a dalet. So if you take Aleph, Chet, Resh, it is the Hebrew word Acher, which means another one. And so what would happen is, this is the historical books point this out, scholars, that Jews, Sumerians, Gnostics, etc., would sneak into synagogues 2,000 years ago, and as the Jews were singing Shema Yisrael, Echad, they would say Acher, and try to mess up the prayer by saying, "Here is the Lord God, the Lord is a Acher, another God," meaning that there are other gods. Okay. And so they emphasize the dalet to say, yeah, get out of here. Okay. Now that sounds silly, doesn't it? But what's happening is that there was a questioning, and of course, also, I'm sure I'm not going to get into Christianity. That's now a whole nother class, obviously. But also at the same time, what you have the development of in the early first century of what? Christianity. And the belief in one God who is able to be in three parts, the Trinity. That's a whole nother geschichte. How 3 and 1, 1 and 3, and all that stuff. Okay. So notice what it says here. God's oneness and exclusivity. So automatically, what they're doing is they're taking the words of whom? They're not making this up. Say, oh, I like that idea. Okay, let's go with that, guys. Rabbi Akiva, what do you think of that idea? Oh, that's good. Let's go. Okay, let's go, guys. Okay, let's teach that one. Make a prayer book that has the Shema in it. But rather, it was based upon our prophets from Israel. Why? Because the prophets had to overcome the destruction of this first temple in Jerusalem in the year 576 BCE. Because when that temple was destroyed, there were those who said, see, the gods of the Babylonians were more powerful than your big one God, okay? It used to be, my God's bigger than your God, my God's bigger than yours. Too bad. We win all the battles, we do everything. Our God, Jehovah, Adonai, is the best God there is, because God, we defeat we knock everyone out. But all of a sudden, in 576 BCE, guess what? There were those who said, well, guess what? Your God obviously ain't so powerful, because guess what? Your God was destroyed and defeated in battle by the Babylonian gods. They won, and you're done. You're out. Put. And we're going to take a number of you Jews over to Babylonia as captives, as refugees, hostages, whatever you want to call them. Okay. But therefore, the genius then of the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and many of the minor prophets who lived at this time, their genius, and also previously, early on, going back to the 8th century, when the temple in Jerusalem was being attacked the first time by Nebuchadnezzar, another Babylonian situation, is that they were able to say, guess what? These other gods are what? It says this in a number of Psalms and other parts in the prayer book. Those gods are no gods at all. They're nothing gods. They're fakers. They're fake gods, fake news, fake gods. But rather, there's only one God. Then someone said, well, how's that possible? How was that temple destroyed? First one, second one, etc. How was it destroyed? Obviously, their God, no, their gods are not stronger. Our God destroyed his own house, his own home, to teach you Jews a lesson. So you can imagine God suffered along with you. Because imagine a parent having to punish his own child by hurting himself. That's the idea. So this is what the rabbis are stuck with. This whole concept that there is one God in charge of everything. And the other gods, they ain't no gods. They're fake gods. They're worthless. And the idols are nothing. They're just statues. You can talk to a statue. It's like that old joke about talking to the Western Wall. You know, it's like talking to a wall. Okay. But the fact is, guess what? There is only one God. And this God's exclusivity happens to be, and by the way, and I've said this before, it's difficult for us as modern Reform Jews, going back to Lisa's question before, but that the fact is that this is the God of the Jews that we're talking about here. But the God of everyone, whose central focus is for the Jewish people, everyone is ancillary to this. And that's why, as I've said this many times already, and that is, the Bible is the autobiography or the biography of the Jewish people, period. People will say, well, it doesn't talk about the Chinese, it doesn't talk about the Native Americans, it doesn't talk about the Incas, all of whom lived even before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, okay? Well, it doesn't have to. First of all, they didn't know about them, obviously. Okay, that's impossible, number one. But number two is, what's the difference? So, for instance, if I were to write my own autobiography, or if Janice were to write my biography, okay, Janice, I'm sure you're working on it now, right? Okay. But the fact is, guess what? You only talk about me and my family growing up where I went and all the things and all blah, blah, blah. You know, I don't care. I mean, yeah, the only people I'm going to be in my biography are people like Eric who have come to meet in my life. But the people I don't know. They're not going to be in my book. And so the Jews are in a small piece of earth, and they know about all these people. Don't get hung up with it. But this was what the rabbis then inherited, that they had to somehow keep vital and alive the concept of what, remember I talked about last week, Elohim Chayim, a living God, in spite of the destruction of his own house. Okay, so the rabbis had two concerns. Number one concern was how to live a Jewish life, because they had to imagine, the temple in Jerusalem is destroyed. Jews are wondering, what do I do? What do I say? What do I pray? When do I eat? What do I do? What do I do on Shabbat? How does the Shabbat begin? How does it end? What about the holiday? Everything was in total, complete turmoil. We're lucky because we have it all today. Whether you regardless of how you worship it and practice it, we have it all. okay? But the fact is, 2,000 years ago, they had garnished. And even the thing that they had was gone, the temple in Jerusalem. So these rabbis had to create a Judaism that made sense to people. And they say, okay, we're going to follow this thing. And guess what? One of the greatest challenges of Judaism almost to this very day is what? Not only the challenge how to live a Jewish life, but actually how to die as a Jew, possibly, and to be willing to die as a Jew. And ask any, if we could, unfortunately, those 28 hostages who are murdered, okay, that's the bottom line, okay. So the rabbis had to take all of this and come up with a concept, something of a concept of God. And again, you'll see from these wonderful statements that I came up with, I got on the internet, of course, okay, because Google knows everything. Okay, but that's okay. God, I do believe, I mean this seriously, God created Google, internet. Yeah, just like God created Losartan and omeprazole and Cozar and all these medications I take. God created every one of them, and you too, so we could be alive. AI too, yeah, why not? Sure, because God gave into God implanted within Bill Gates's brain or whatever it was. That's not alleged, it's Bubameister that he did this in a hotel room. I read somewhere. I don't know. But anyway, wherever it was, okay. But anyway, let's not get off track, Rabbi. Okay, now I start talking to myself. This spirit. Okay. Notice I looked over there, right? Okay. But the fact is that they had to create also, or to keep live, I should say, not create, but they had to keep alive the idea of God, because two things again, they needed to define Jewish life, and that is called halakha, Jewish law. So the Talmud, certainly the Mishnah, definitely, which was written in 200 of the Common Era in Israel, and the Talmud written in 400 in Jerusalem and 500 in Babylonia, they had to, on the basis of them is a halachic, Jewish way of life. You do this, you do that, you don't do that. Okay, do's and don'ts and don'ts. Okay, because Judaism had to be defined, otherwise we have nothing at all. Okay, but on the other hand, there was a whole nother area in which they could play within limits, and that is called midrash. Some of you are familiar with these words, midrashim. And the rabbis in midrash could have fun with God, because you see, in the halakha, they have to go by the Torah. There's 613 mitzvot in the Torah. God said every single one of them. That's what you do. You don't do that. Okay. And keep in mind also that after all, if God is the Melech Malchei HaMelachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if God is the King of Kings, okay, then therefore, what is their model for the government of heaven? To use that term, okay? Sounds Christian, but it's Jewish. I could say in Hebrew it's not more Jewish, but okay. Or Yiddish, it's more Jewish, but I can't, okay. But the fact is, how does God govern the kingdom of heaven? God says, you do this, you do that, you don't do that, you're going to get punished. I'm going to send you to jail. If you do that, I'm going to reward you, okay? But why? Because that's very good Bible. And we've talked about this many times. The Bible, the biblical system, also based upon the government of heaven, so to speak, as a ruler, a king, an emperor, a pharaoh, is in charge. And if you don't listen, you're going to get punished. If you listen, you're going to get rewarded, okay? Yeah. When I did something good as a kid, I said, Mom, can we go to Rogoff's, the toy store in Rockaway, so I get a present? Okay. Oh, yeah. On the other hand, the one time I did say a four-letter word, my mother did wash my mouth out with soap. Okay, guess what? At least with her, I never said a four-letter word again.
Is that before you knew the rabbi?
No, I always knew that. Okay, but the fact is, and I didn't say that God made me say that either, like Bill. Okay, but the fact is that that's the way the system works, whether you like it or not. And in truth, if you think about, that's the way all of us learn. Okay, unfortunately, we don't learn so well, most of us, because just look at the way people drive here in Florida, and you understand they don't learn what's right and what's wrong. But we're not going to talk about Floridians right now. Okay, so anyway, that's the system they had with halakha. But that's a tough. But then you could say, well, what is the view of the rabbis in terms of the halachic, the legal system? It's very simple. This is what God said in the Torah. This is what you do. If you don't do it, you're going to bear the consequences. And that is true. Let's face it. If you think that and it's unbelievable, I'm sure all of you have gone through this, those of you who live north of here and military, when I'm making that when I'm coming up to the light at Military and Atlantic, and I'm going to be making the left turn, you can't just go when the light turns green because you know these Floridians are going to go through the red light coming this way, right? That, by the way, the word Floridian, I didn't coin that, but Judy and I saw it on a bumper sticker once. It's taking the word Floridia, Florida, and idiot, and making it into one word. And they are. But guess what? Eventually, one of them is going to be in an accident because you can only do that. The percentages are you only can break that law. There's a reason why they're red lights. I hate red lights. I can't stand them. But I would love, I'm not going to leave you, don't worry. I'm not going to live in Hawaii, okay? But I would love to live in, we went on vacation once on the island of Molokai, okay? And it actually is one of the islands of Hawaii that is the way it used to be. You know why I want to live there? They have one traffic light and no stop signs. Oh, my God. I hope the world to come when Messiah comes. That's what it is. I don't want to, I hate lights. I'd love to go through every one, but guess what? Why don't I? Because it's dangerous. And also because of what? As Judy reminds me, it's the law. Okay. And law holds society together. So that's what the rabbis define God on one level as. God is the legal authority of Jewish life. Now, going back 2,000 years ago, it's not Christian life. It's not Muslim. Well, there were no Muslims yet. That was 700s. Christian life or other groups, okay, the different religious groups. But basically, God is the God of Jewish life. But then remember, going back to the prophets, they could go into Midrash and begin to explore, who is God for me? How does God really deal with life and human beings? And they had fun. They really could, because within certain parameters, they were able to enjoy this. So let's look what I have here. And most of these are from Midrash or Agada, which is another word for that. Number one, when God sends Moses, and notice, by the way, you see below at the very end of the paragraph, it says Shemot Rabbah. Shemot Rabbah is a Midrash that was written quite a bit later on. But anyway, that's Rabbah means great. And it's a rabbinic commentary to the book of which Shemot is Exodus. Okay. When God sends Moses to the Israelites in Egypt, Moses asked God what name to use. We talked about this last week. And God replies, yeah, sure, yeah, I am what I am. In Shemot Rabbah, a medieval midrash in the book of Exodus, several rabbis explore the meaning of this phrase. Because again, they have to, like Eric in the class does on Saturdays, they want to know, what does the Bible say? And they could begin to define God based upon everything has to be found its source. This is what I said the other night, Simchat Torah. Everything has to find its source in the Torah. So God said to Moses, I'll be what I will be. And God said, so shall you say to the children of Israel, I will be has sent me to you. What does that even mean? God said to Moses, Rabbi Abba Bar Mamal said, and by the way, it's essential. The rabbis, when they quote someone, must always give their name and why, because then you're going to remember it. And a person is remembered by their name. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moses, you seek to know my name? Notice, this is exactly what we learned last week, right? This is very biblical, but now rabbinical. I am named according to my actions. Yeah. At different times, I am named God Almighty, El Shaddai, Adonai Tzevaot, Lord of hosts, God Elohim, Adonai, Yodei Vavhe. When I judge my creatures, I am called Elohim. When I wage war against the wicked, I am called Tzevaot. In other words, notice that. So therefore, if anyone were to ask you, okay, you went to this fantastic, immense course by Rabbi Steve, okay, today, what did you learn about the rabbis? You can say, guess what? We know God by the experiences we have of God, just like we know people in our lives by the experiences we have of them, right? Yeah. By the way a person treats you, by what you hear about the person, that's the person. Number two, God's prayer offers an insight into God's deepest wish for God's own behavior. So this almost, the rabbis played around and almost made God into another human being. God cares about the way God acts. And by the way, this is very much a part of, I sound like I'm quoting myself today, I shouldn't be doing that. You can quote me, but you don't know what I'm going to be saying, so that's difficult. And I don't know what I'm going to be saying, actually, so who knows? But the fact is, is that in my sermon, when I talked about God's role in the Akedah, the almost sacrifice of Abraham, of Isaac, right? And the fact is that what disturbed me in that sermon was the fact is that God didn't question why he allowed the whole thing to happen. Ultimately leading, as I talked about, many of you were, some of you weren't there, to Sarah's death. And that bothered me. And the Bible can't deal with that because the Bible is not that piece of literature the rabbis can. Hold on a second, let me just finish this paragraph. The Babylonian Talmud recounts God's prayer for God's self. Along the same lines, notice Rabbi Yochanan said the name of Rabbi Yossi. From where is it derived that the Holy One, blessed be he, prays? As it is stated, notice from Isaiah, I'll bring them to my holy mountain and make them joyful in the house of my prayer. The verse does not say the house of their prayer, but rather the house of my prayer. From here we see that the Holy One, blessed be he, prays. The Gemara, which is another word for the Talmud, asks, what does God pray? Rav Zutra Bar Tuvia said that, sometimes they'll quote like 3-4 rabbis, said, God says, may it be my will that my mercy. In other words, God prays every day that God should be merciful and kind to us. And you walk away from that and you say, is that real? But you know something? If I were to say, because I talk to God a lot in prayer or just talk to God, you know something, it's just like, God, if, be nice to me today, okay? I don't want to be zapped for everything I did wrong or whatever. Just be nice. Isn't that nice? Yeah, exactly. Glenn, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Children in an Hebrew school, it was that there used to be a god, I can't remember, Monarchs or something like that. And it was a statue where you took your firstborn and threw your firstborn into the fire.
Yeah.
And in that way, you were helping the rest of your people that were around you, the rest of your community, to make sure that the food would grow and so on and so forth. However, many mothers of children collapsed and cried and so on. So that's the only way I make sense out of it, is that God was actually teaching people, and
Do that.
He was a God that did not require that.
Yeah, so that's the usual explanation, yeah. But it doesn't really, well, yeah, but there's more to it than that, because obviously, Eric?
Could God pray that we behave properly?
Yeah, well, I behave that you pray, you behave better, Eric, every day. And I know Betty does also. Okay, number 3. Another name of God is Hamakom. Interesting, which means, the place. Okay. Hamakom, the place, is a term sometimes used to refer to God. The Jerusalem Talmud, remember that was 500 of the Common Era, an ancient corpus of law, ethics, and stories from the land of Israel, it's 400, explores the concept of God's omnipotence and transcendence through the name Hamakom. Now, halacha, okay, the dealing with how to behave. Rabbi Hanina ben Akashia says, the Holy One prays, and notice it says, not said, because it was written at the time of these rabbis
So fast.
communicating these things.
I can't get it.
How did they write these things down? Well,
Yeah.
they have what's called a chozeh, which means a person who is, let's see, audiographic. Okay, in other words, they can hear and write it down a time later, word for word. These are called audiographs. So if you think about this, just about the Jews, not about any other cultures. 2,000 years ago, you have the Talmud, okay, 6,000 pages of the discussions of these rabbis about Jewish law and Jewish thought. Well, how did that happen? You didn't have cassette players. You didn't have recorders. You couldn't have someone writing. Hold on a second, slow down, please. I ran out of ink in my inkwell. I gotta go, or I gotta kill another bird because the quill broke. I mean, how do you do? You can't do that. So there was a person called a chozeh in Hebrew, an audiographic person who literally could hear every word and then later on write it down word for word. Interestingly enough, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, alav shalom, he actually, even though he died, I think, in 1976, I think. Anyway, he had a chozeh. Now, he didn't need a chozeh because by then we had tape recorders and stuff. but he continued to the tradition. I forget this guy, I forget his name now. He died about 3 years ago. And he would listen to what's called the Farbringen or the Lubavitcher Rebbe's lecture, and then later on go and write down word for word. But what they would do is they would then go back to the lecturer and say, is this correct? Okay, obviously that's a point. Okay, so let's hear. Halacha. The Holy One prays to him, wanted, etc. Okay, that's what Rabbi Akashia said. Why does one use a substitute name for the name of the Holy One, praise be he, and calls him place? To say that he is the place of the world. Turn over the page. And those of you who are at home have these pages. But the world is not his place. What does that mean? God is in this world. This place is Hamakom, the Makom of God. But God's place is not only this place, because God's place is where? Okay. Rabbi Huna, in the name of Rabbi Imi, it is written, dwelling is the primordial God, to say that he is the dwelling of the world, but the world is not his dwelling. And Rabbi Yosef ben Chalafta said, it is written, the Eternal One said, this is a place, there is a place with me, not in me. And that's from the Jerusalem Talmud in one of the tractates, Makot. Okay, so we begin to learn that when one were to say to you, what do Jews believe in God? The answer would be, well, it depends how you experience God. But one thing is for sure, I do know that God is Hamakom. We'd all agree on that. God is this place. This place is, there was a great, well, I'm not going to talk about Hasidism particularly, but in their view, there's the Kotska Rebbe, a great rabbi from the city of Kotsk in Poland, in the 1700s, was asked by his students, where is God? And he answered, God is where you let God in. Okay? Okay. So the same thing would be is, yeah, God is here, but I don't recognize this. God is the makom, the place of here. But on the other hand, I don't recognize it until I say, God, come in. Okay. Number 4. What does God do all day? I often wondered, what do I do all day? Someone said, oh, I know what rabbis do. They just have to show up on Friday night and Saturday mornings, and that's it. You got it easy. Okay. Oh, God. Oh, God, tell them. Okay. What is God? Do you ever wonder what God did the rest of the day? I mean, really? He doesn't. I mean, I don't think God has a computer. He has Netflix. Does God watch Netflix? Okay. The Babylonian Talmud describes God's daily schedule. Okay. Now, again, they're playful because guess what? You can be playful about a person when you do it with what? Number 1, respect. And number 2, because you love that person. Okay. Including the altered role of play before and after destruction of the temple. The Gemara asks, the Talmud asks in general, is that so? Is there no making sport for the Holy One, blessed be he? In other words, can't you be playful about God? But doesn't Rav Yehuda say that Rav says there are 12 hours in the day? During the first 3 hours, the Holy One, blessed be he, sits and engages in Torah study. During the second 3 hours, he sits and judges the entire world. That's the morning, okay? Once he sees that the world has rendered itself liable to destruction, in other words, the people are just killing themselves and wiping themselves off and really messing up this whole thing that God created, he arises from the throne of judgment and for the rest of the day sits in the throne of mercy and the world is not destroyed.
Good thing.
Yeah, but the beauty of that and the rabbi's sense of God is they can be playful with God. But it indicates something very important, that God is what? And this goes back, this is again, the rabbis have to find everything in the Bible. The God is very much aware of what we are doing all the time. And God cares about the way we are doing. And God wants to undo our mess and help us undo it. And on the other hand, make it better. That's the whole point of this. So it's a God who is not just one and exclusive, but cares, number 1, about the way we behave, and thereby cares about the way this world works itself out. But as I pointed out, again, I'm pointing myself on Saturday morning, talking about, if God helped to free the hostages last week and was a part of this process somehow, why did God have to wait 2 years? Okay, what God could have done it the first day, or not. The thing didn't have to happen at all. Okay, you can ask these questions forever and ever. We're not going to get answers. Okay, well, we can play around with it, but what kind of answers? We just ultimately questions like this, we just get into a really dark place. Okay, because there's no place, you work yourself into a dark hole which you can't get out of anymore about God, about life. And you almost become worse than the Stoics who say, live today because tomorrow you die. And I didn't say this, what the hell, But raised okay.
Okay.
Mom, sorry. But but the fact is that the rabbis could think about these things. And there were times when they couldn't come up with. They said, this is what it is. And that's the beautiful thing. There's a wonderful midrash about the destruction of the second temple in Jerusalem. And this is reflected in a sense in the book that we read, parts of it in our tradition Reform, on Tisha B'Av at Lamentations, in which it says that God sat with our ancestors, the Jews in Babylonia, sat with us as we were sitting by the river of the Euphrates, river of Babylonia, and sat there, and as we cried, God cried with us. So you could say, well, why did God have to cry with us? God could have changed everything. It wouldn't have happened. In one sense, you could say, therefore, what? To make it more modern. I'm not sure where my thoughts are going right now, so we'll see. But the fact is, I do believe that God was with those hostages in those horrible cages, in those rooms of isolation. And God suffered with them as well. Okay? Because God needs to deal with a certain system that God created. And also, as it does say in the book of Psalms, 1,000 years in your sight, O God, are as but yesterday when it is past. Meaning 1,000 years to God is one day of our time. Right? God's time is not our time. God is infinite. God doesn't have a watch and say, okay, we got 45 minutes left of this thing. Okay. Yeah. No, God doesn't have any time. So to us, it's horrible. Okay. Yes, Michael. Evan?
12-hour day.
Well, they did. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that
12-hour day, and there was, obviously, it was much longer.
Yeah. Well, what this thing here is quoting, this is 2,000 years ago. Lynn, you want to, I think,
Daylight, dark.
yeah, it's daylight time, not nighttime. So it's probably more or less 24 hours. I mean, 2,000 years ago, they had a concept of time like we have, sort of, without having these watches. Stuff. Yeah. Okay, number 5. Oh, you want to hear something like that? Oh, yeah. It's daylight time. And they didn't have daylight savings time yet either, thank God. Okay, which I still don't understand. Okay, and number 5, in the Midrash. In the Midrash, God is often depicted as the creator of the universe and the divine architect of the world. In other words, God made it all, right? Okay. The Midrashic interpretations of the creation narrative in Genesis 1:1 through 31, which we're not going to look at, but it's a part of our Parsha this week. I've decided this year I'm going to go every week I'm going to go into the part of the Torah portion that you've never read before. Okay. For example, often highlight God's good desire and evil desire, as well as the good and evil desires of human beings. These interpretations provide a deeper understanding of the divine will and the complexities of human nature. And so the Midrash, that's from a quote from Wikipedia, the Midrash obviously went into everything. And what does it even mean, God's good desire and God's evil desire? Can evil be a part of God? Yeah. And it actually says this, I think, in maybe the book of Isaiah, that God created good and evil. Okay. Yeah. What does that mean? That God created the opposites of all opposites, but we only see them as opposites, of course. But God created good and evil because God this way, what did we say a couple of weeks ago in Natsabim? We also read it on High Holy Days. I give to you life and death, good and evil. Choose life that you might live. Okay. So if that's what the Torah says, I gave to you good and evil. So God said, I gave you a good gift and I gave you a bad gift. Choose which one you want. Okay. Choose where you're going to go. So therefore, God bought both a really nice gift and a really lousy gift. A beautiful sweater and an ugly sweater. Which one are you going to choose? Okay, which one are you going to choose? And guess what? There are people who choose the ugly sweater, right? Yeah. And then they have to deal with those consequences. Okay. Just to the end of this page, in the next page, the Midrash also explores the unity of God, emphasizing that God is the sole creator in the world, was created for the sake of the Torah. There's a reminder of the divine plan and the importance of adhering to the teaching of God. That's from aligned by Jewish learning. And finally, overall, the Midrash serves as a rich source of insight into the nature of God and the divine purpose in the world, offering a profound understanding of the relationship between God and humanity. Okay, and finally, this was interesting. The concept of God's reward and punishment is a central theme in the Bible, and thereby rabbinic literature, reflecting his justice, mercy, and righteousness, and certainly it was reflected in the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services, obviously. Okay. The Bible frequently speaks of rewards for faithfulness and obedience, while also warning of judgments for sin and disobedience. And these themes are woven into the biblical fabric of biblical teaching, offering both encouragement and solemn warning to believers. In other words, they felt that God is, again, like I said before, there's a divine government, a governing. And yeah, there are laws. If you have no laws, you have anarchy. Okay? And then society, what? We see this today. There are those who are anarchists almost, okay? And then you have nothing. Society falls apart. And I'm not going to read through all of these. You can read that yourself. Take these home. Heavenly rewards, earthly blessings, spiritual rewards, eternal judgment. These themes serve as a reminder of the importance of living a life that reflects God's will and the potential consequences of failing to do so. So again, going back to finally, remember, number one is for the rabbinic period, the rabbis had to find their footing and keep their footing in the Bible, our Hebrew Bible. They had no choice because that's the system they lived under and worked under. Otherwise, they would be like Christianity, the Christians, who simply create another system. Christianity is based upon our system, but they went outside the parameters of the system in order to create something else. Okay. And maybe sometime we should do a course on Christianity. Be interesting about Christianity, which is very complex to say the least. But anyway, the other part of it though is, what's Lila? Yeah, comparative I meant, yeah. But I have to be careful to make sure I don't show up Judaism too good. But the fact is that remember also, working with the Bible, they therefore what? That a God who cares about the way we live, but the God who is in control of everything, and everything does come from God, and God is what? One. It's interesting. Lynn is probably the only person who could possibly sing the song with me. And that is, I remember when I grew up in Reform, for those of you who grew up in Reform, there was they called it a hymn. They called it hymnals in those days. And it goes like this. God is in his holy temple, earthly thoughts be silent now, while assemble in devotion, before thy greatness bow. That was Reformed Judaism, based upon, Christian influence, but also biblical Judaism, as you see now. Any questions about that so far? Okay. Now, Kabbalah or Jewish mysticism. The rabbis, of course, all of them, great Kabbalists, whoever, like Moses Cordovero in the 12th century, and even going back to the Bible, Ezekiel possibly was a mystic anyway, not a Kabbalist, but certainly Moses Cordovero in Spain in the 12th century, and so many others, the Isaac Lurie in the 16th century, the 1500s. We can go on and on and on. All of them were what? All of them were Orthodox, fully observant Jews. Okay. We normally think of them running around meditating and dancing and singing, okay, and all that kind of stuff. No. Okay, that was the Hasidim later on. But the fact is, even the Hasidim, all of them were based in Torah, Orthodox, traditional ways of life, period. This is one of the reasons why it does say in the tradition, although it wasn't necessarily followed, it didn't have to be followed, that you can't start studying Kabbalah until you're 40 years old. So what are you studying during the 40, let's say if you start studying Mishnah and the Chumash, the Bible and the Torah at the age of 7, so for the previous 33 years, what were you studying? The Torah and the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Shulchan Aruch, the codes of Jewish law, and all of these things. We sometimes mistake it and say, oh, these are just mystics. They were all grounded in Jewish law, period. Okay. And then what they did was, and why did they do what they did? There could be many reasons for this. I think simply there are some people who are born to see the world differently than other people do. I think that. On the other hand, there are other people who have said that mysticisms, and not just Judaisms, but also other mysticisms, and almost every main religion has a mystical track to it, developed because it was a way of dealing with the difficulties of the times in which people are living in. Because when times are tough, people feel that society as such, morals, everything is falling apart. And how can I continue to have where is God? Because the transcendent God is so transcendent. And if you remember going back to the 1960s, even in this country, the God is Dead movement, right? Rubenstein, I think his name was, right? Yeah. What's that? Oh, back in Hong, yes, but God is dead in the 60s. Okay, there's a sense that, well, God must be dead. Okay, God forbid. Okay. However, the fact is that mysticism is when God feels so distant from us, so transcendent, so there's an expression that goes actually is biblical, which is called in Hebrew Hester Panim, that God has hidden his face from us. God's not even looking at us. Remember that idea that God wakes up every day and say, hey, know something, God, be merciful to these people. God's given up so much on us. He said, Geh gesund to hate. God speaks Yiddish, of course. And say, Geh gesund to hate, and I'm finished with them. I'm not going to bother. Let them just destroy themselves. And sometimes people feel that today, right? It seems like the world is going down the pit. Okay. However, what in mystical traditions, quite often, what they begin to say is, you know something, there is the transcendent God, but I have the feeling, I have the intuition that there is a immanent God, immanent meaning within. And I can find that God not by going out there, but going within me. And that's where Kabbalah or mysticism plays its role. Kabbalah developed in its strongest movement going back to the 15th century, which means the 1400s and 1500s and 1300s, 1400s in Spain. And what was going on in Spain at that time? The Inquisition. Yeah. Judaism was being destroyed. And imagine the Jews living in Spain before the Inquisition was sort of like us here. It's like, sort of like the Jews in Germany. The Jews were involved in every part of society, of Spanish and Portuguese society. They were the elite, they were the educated, they were the wealthy as well as the poor, of course, also. But the fact is that they were accepted, it was called the Golden Age of Spain, going back a couple of hundred years before that. And then all of a sudden, there are various, obviously, historical movements in terms of what happened there. But the Catholic Church turned against the Jews and the Muslims, by the way, and said either become a Christian, Catholic, or we're going to kill you. That became, of course, known as the Inquisition. And so the Jews began to look at this and said, but where's God throughout all of this? Similar to that question, I'm sure, going back to the year, let's say 69, 68, before the temple, destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And the Jews under Roman occupation were saying, you know something, we heard that Vespasian, the Roman general, is going to come down and destroy the temple. There's the talk that he's sending down his legions to destroy the temple in Jerusalem and to destroy our city and kill us. That can't be. Just like, for instance, there were those in Germany in 1935, 36, who said, oh, we heard about these things from Hitler, but it can't happen, right? And the fact is that obviously these things do happen. And if you believe in God and God is the creator and involved in everything in life, begin to say, well, where is God? Right? Where is God? And here. So in Kabbalah, they created a very interesting system, and we have it on this page here, second page, third page, whatever. Kabbalah and its view of the divine. The person here his name is Isaac Luria. His nickname was the Ari, and he was born in 1534 in Spain and ultimately ended up in Sfat in northern Israel. Now, Lurianic Kabbalah, as it is called, by the way, Kabbalah existed before him. And for those of you who attend my Saturday morning class in the Zohar, The Zohar was written 200 years before Isaac Luria. But Isaac Luria took the Kabbalah, the mystical teachings and insights by previous great rabbis, such as I'll throw out some names, Moses Cordovero, also from Spain in the 12th century, okay? And also Nachmanides, Nachman ben Maimon, who was also the 12th century in Girona in Spain, also notice Spain. And Helene, right? We were there. We saw his home, right? Right. Nachmanides, and these were these are the formative years going back to the 12th century of the Common Era in Spain, trying to deal with the changes in their society. Where is God? So Lurianic Kabbalah posits that God contracts itself to make space for creation. And God's presence is then filtered through worlds and different emanations. The Zohar, a foundational work of Jewish mysticism, discusses these emanations. I'm going to go back over this, so if your eyes start crossing, don't worry. It is thus that the cause of causes has brought forth the 10 Sfirot and called the crown the source, an inexhaustible fountain of light, whereas he designates himself Ein Sof, limitless. He has neither shape nor form, and there is no vessel that could contain him, no means to comprehend him. It is in this sense that it has been said, search not the things that are too hard for thee, and seek not the thing which is hidden from thee, Ben Sirah. Then he formed a vessel small as the letter Yud, which is filled with him, and he called it wisdom, gushing fountain. That's from the Zohar, in the parashah, about the section from Exodus, Bo. We're going to continue through this, and then we'll go back over it. The Hebrew word simtsum can mean contraction, retraction, demarcation, restraint, and concentration. The term simtsum originates in the Kabbalah and refers to God's contraction of himself before the creation of the world and for the purpose of creating the world. To put it another way, the omnipresent God, who exists beyond time and space before creation, withdraws a part of his infinite presence into himself. Now, let's stop there for a second. Let's go back to the Bible and to the Torah. Linda just left, whoever rang that thing. Okay. So the question then becomes, remember, God is the creator. God is omnipotent, all-powerful, omnipresent, everywhere, in charge of everything, right? Okay. So notice these rabbis, the mystics, again, they have to what? Base everything in our Torah. They can't make things up in that sense. With this divine gesture, God restricts himself in Simsum, clearing the empty space that is necessary for creation. The emanation and the creation of the world are then able to occur in the center of God, following this act of Simsum. In this process, God limits his omnipotence so that a finite world can exist within finite contours. Within Simsum, there would be no creation. Without Simsum, there would be no creation. For this reason, Simsum is a key concept in Jewish thought. And finally, because the Simsum results in the space in which the spiritual and physical worlds and ultimately free will can exist, God is often referred to as what? Hamakom, the place, the omnipresent, rabbinic literature. Olam, the Hebrew term for a world, is derived from the triliteral, meaning 3 letters, Aleph, Lam, and Mem, which means concealment. This etymology is complementary with the concept of Tzimtzum, that the subsequent spiritual realms and the ultimate physical universe conceal to different degrees the life force of creation. Okay, now, what does this mean? First of all, I hope you're impressed by the fact that you have no idea what in the world I just read. I also hope that you are impressed by the fact that the Kabbalists, and actually probably the earlier works of Kabbalah go back to the 7th or 8th centuries in Provence, or let's say Provence, France, okay, France, okay. They probably go back to there from France in the 7th and 8th centuries. I'll just throw it out. 2 of the early books of Kabbalah are Sefer Bahir and Sefer Yetzirah. And no one knows who wrote them really. I mean, someone said Sefer Yetzirah was written by Abraham, obviously. But the fact is, notice what is being described here, which was not described in the Talmud to any degree, although some of the Kabbalists, such as the great Rabbi Akiva, was most definitely a Kabbalist of some sort, a mystic of some sort, and others as well. But the fact is that the Kabbalists did something that no one had done. And I'm going to say the following: not that I'm a great scholar of mysticism, okay, to say the least of all religions, but in Judaism, in Kabbalah, something is done that I don't know if any religion does this to the degree of detail that the Kabbalists did, and that is to describe God, what God looks like, how God operates, and how God acts in great, great detail in Kabbalah, in the works of Kabbalah, which is why it's so complicated. Okay. Now you could say, well, how did they know this? How did they know these things? Did they just make them up, and therefore it comes from them? Well, when you read the different texts, and many of them are only written in Hebrew, many of these texts, the only way that you can comprehend that what they comprehended was by saying it must be that God spoke to them. Let us take, for instance, someone, the great Isaac Luria, whose name was just mentioned. If I remember correctly, he died at the age of 35, 36 years of age. Most of these people died very young. And his student, Chaim Vital, who, by the way, was born in Italy. It was interesting. Anyway, is that he only learned from Isaac Luria for 2.5 years. And yet, I have in my office there, I have 22 volumes of his work, Eitz Chaim, of all of the transcriptions of all of the teachings of Isaac Luria. So you can say, how is that even possible? Or forget it, how does even Isaac Chaim Vital know all of these things? How does he know it? Well, two things. He actually said this, he believed that he was the reincarnation, and actually, according to him, Isaac Luria told him that you have a part of my neshama, you are my reincarnation. And therefore, I'm speaking through you. Okay. Now let's take another person, a very interesting person, Joseph Cairo, Caro, 1500s also, who also lived in Sfat. He's buried up there. You can visit his grave. And if we get to Israel sometime as a congregation, we'll go visit the graves of the Kabbalists up in Sfat. And Joseph Cairo wrote the Shulchan Aruch, which is an immense book of Jewish law. Very, very, I'm studying that now, very difficult to understand. Okay, very hard, about how to live a Jewish life, halakha. It's totally legal. And yet, Joseph Cairo wrote a book in which he described that he was channeling the Mishnah that was written 1,300 years before him, which is a book of Jewish law. That's how he was able to do it. He was actually channeling a mystical representation of the Mishnah.
Not the people who wrote it, the book itself?
Yes. The Mishnah was actually channeling through him. So, because you read these things and how one human being can have these thoughts. It's like I said to you last week, I think it was, there's a Sufi mystic, I forget his name now, but there's a wonderful book if you're interested in these kind of mishigas, okay, these kind of things. It's called Alone with the Alone. And it's a very wonderful book. And the book, I read it long time ago. But it did say simply that the fact that we have the belief that there is a God is proof that God exists. Because why? How? This is what it basically, this paragraph sort of said a second ago. How can a finite creature such as ourselves, finite, guess what, guys? Even if you live to be 122 years old, I now say 122, not 100, because I found out that someone lived at 122 years old, died in 1996, so it must be real. Okay. Anyway, that's beyond Moses. But the fact is, I want someone here at Temple Sinai. I want to live long enough. That means that's another 50 years. I'll be the rabbi here. But anyway, I'll be here. They'll lock me in a closet, put me in a showcase there. Okay, but can I be in the showcase? Yeah, no, okay. Okay, but anyway, this is the fact of that. the only way that you can explain these things is by going into a different paradigm, a different place, and say it's not what we normally think things are. And that's what mysticism does. But let's take, for instance, what we just read, okay? What is Tzimtzum? Okay. I've spent obviously, and I don't mean, when I talk about myself, I hope you understand it's not because I'm great, can't talk about myself, right? Okay, because I do believe that we ourselves are teachers. And the way we ourselves are teachers is who we are. We're a vessel of teaching. So it's not an ego. I hope you understand it's not an ego thing, okay? So anyway, I've spent a lot of time studying Kabbalah. And I don't understand all of it to say, can't, I mean, I'm not a mystic by any means, and certainly there are a couple of Mukubalim today in the world, and I'm sure they're in a totally different place, different plane, where you probably can't even talk to them, okay? So the fact they speak either Hebrew or Yiddish. But anyway, but the ideas I have in my mind are like, okay. That God calling? No?
Hello?
Oh, okay, so anyway,
Not there.
is that there's this expanse of infinite knowledge that is in the books that I study. Now, I can't grasp all of it myself, to say the least. I certainly can't read it and whatever. I don't even understand a lot of it. So anyway, it's already filtering down into my little brain here. Okay. So notice what's happening already. What is that infinite amount of knowledge is already contracting itself, bringing it into itself in order to do what? To be able to make space for it to be filtered down on another level. If you'd like to think about it, take some kind of a stew, okay? But you want to get the juice more, probably it should be wine or something, but I can't think of the analogy. But anyway, you have sieves, right? You have different filters. So the infinite knowledge is filtered through my mind, and then so I can now understand parts of it, but not the whole thing. But then for me to explain it to you, it has to be filtered down even further in the hopes that you have some understanding of what hopefully I understand. And so the same thing with God. With Isaac Luria, his concept is the following. And this is described in the book by by the way, Isaac Luria wrote almost nothing. All of his teachings are written by his student, Chaim Vital. And anyway, it's described the following. If we could imagine, which we can't really, but if you could imagine before creation itself, before the Big Bang, everything, beyond is God, which is called at that stage, because we have to call things, otherwise we can, what is that? We'll say Ein Sof. Ein Sof, which means that which is undefinable, infinite, beyond. And this beyond infinite thing, I don't want to call it a being, because then it sounds like I'm doing the movie Alien or something, okay? And we call it energy, but this divine, the Ein Sof, but again, we have to use human language to describe this process, because otherwise we can't talk about it. I might just go home, okay? So therefore, Isaac Luria said, Chaim Vital wrote about it, is that this divine energy decided to create that which was other than it, to begin a process. And so that divine it contracted itself to allow for there to be other. So, as it did that process, there was still parts of it left in the space that was left by its tzimtzum, by its contraction. It then began to send energy into that other space, which we'll call our physical world to make this simplified. And when this energy was sent down, to use the word down, it's not really down, but sent first, it was too much for our realm, our dimension, to bear, and everything just blew up. It was too much. And so God then retracted and then began to filter further down the energy levels in order for there to be the creative process which we experience in this universe that we live in. But as part of this, that energy from the higher spiritual realms continues to filter down all the time. And therefore, what begins to then happen is a process then in Kabbalah is that when we become aware of this imminent energy that is within us, and then we understand how to be able to utilize it and take it and move it back up to the divine source so that there's a flow of energy from above to below and below to above. Does that make some sense to somebody? Sort of. Okay.
Why did it take 2 times?
What's that?
It took 2 times to
Yeah.
do this?
There was what's called the Shvirata Kelim. There was the breaking up the vessels because they couldn't bear all that energy. Yeah. Because it was much too powerful for it to hold.
So what happened to that which couldn't hold it? Exploded and
Yeah.
this became nothing?
Yeah, because well, then it breaks up, and it's sort of like putting out a fire that's burning, and sparks go everywhere in the air. Sparks then went off into existence and are hidden in different places, and we have to uncover those sparks.
Still out there, the original?
It's everywhere. We have to uncover the
Does it
divine
influence us
spark.
Today?
Yeah. What? Yes.
Has it influence on us today?
Right now. Linda, the 2 L's.
You're studying with at least one partner when we study, and
Let's go back, Lynn. Go back a second. What do you? Who encourages that?
in Judaism, we're encouraged to have a partner when we study, so that we can think things through, and if we have a question, we share it with our partner. Did Gloria study independently most of the time and then seek guidance? Or from what you've read, did Isaac Gloria have a constant partner other than the Almighty?
No, he had other Kabbalistic teachers and students that he did study with. There was a whole group of them in the city of Tzfat that he studied with. And obviously there were teachers before him, very great Kabbalistic thinkers who were able to share this. And then he was the first to formulate this idea, because he was trying to confront the idea of how did existence begin and where is God within all of this? Because actually what begins to happen then is there are 2 parts to Kabbalah. One is this esoteric, this theology, theosophy, whatever you'd like to call it, metaphysics, all up here in the head, what I'm trying to describe to you. It's very, very heady kind of stuff and difficult to understand, really understand. I'm just filtering it down to you at a very simplistic level, just to the best of my ability. But then there's practical Kabbalah, because with that then, of course, as a Jewish way of life, begins to say, guess what? Every time we do a mitzvah, every time we pray, every time we think something, every time we go through anything in life, our goal is to do what? To activate the divine within everything that is now here. And then when we do that, we send it back to the higher spiritual levels. So there's a flow from above to below and below to above. And this is done through a very and then where Kabbalah gets very, very detailed is how does this system work? Through a whole very detailed system of meditations and practices within every single thing that we do. And it is very, very detailed, but that to me is the exciting part of it, because it basically, Kabbalah lets us know how, when we pray, how does prayer work? It describes it. When we do a mitzvah, you're not just doing a good deed, you're actually affecting the entire cosmos and universe and God. Linda?
You brought something to mind which was very exciting, I suppose, to me. When I had my near-death experience and was in a coma for 2 weeks, and lost the ability to speak and so on and so forth. And the near-death experience lasted almost to the end of the coma. I saw a lot of different things. There wasn't words to go with it. There were things that were visual. And it was like I lost my sight in order to see. And one of the things that I saw was the creation of a sun. And it was the energy from God going into this cold, dead body, lighting it up, and then God removing itself from this new star. Now, I don't know anything about where the star was or anything like that. There was no way for me at 4 years old to even be able to understand the concept of thousands of miles from here to there. But that was paired with the people in the concentration camps who were crying and who were shouting out, "Next year in Jerusalem," and God accepting all of this horrible things that were happening to people into itself, and then shining light down on the people themselves. So those were parts of the experiences that I had when I had the near-death experience, and you just explained to me what some of that meant. Thank you.
Good. Yes, Gail?
Scientifically, the universe did contract. It's now expanding and nobody knows what it's expanding into. And that goes along with what you're saying.
Yeah. And you can find that, and books have been written on the similarities between Kabbalah and this whole thing of Tzimtzum and the Big Bang, bomb, boom, bada bing, bada boom, but the Big Bang theory, of course. And it's interesting, but it stands on its own. But to think that not physicists thought of this, but these people I'm talking about are metaphysicists. It's beyond physics, because this is what makes physics happen. The Kabbalah talks about a multi-dimensional existence at all times. And if you think that this is a lot of baloney, kosher baloney, actually in the Brookhaven laboratories on Long Island, they actually are studying the fourth dimension. Okay. And actually they are studying, they think that they believe that they're able to develop models for over almost 50 dimensions. And if you look it up online, it's very interesting that the diagrams of these things. Life is much more than we see it. But the thing is that most of us are trapped. I say trapped because this is the world we live in. This is it, this is my body. This is a plastic podium. But the fact is that the minute I look at this plastic podium and I say, something, is there a form of this podium in a spiritual dimension at this time? And what does that actually even have any meaning to it? Okay. The same way Linda's experiences. When I was dealing with selling a bicycle that I had a couple of years ago, I went to this bicycle place down in Boca. And this, of course, these are images from a Christian tradition, but it's interesting. So I was talking with this guy. First of all, he's Meshuggah. He would, even though he's not Jewish, he was Meshuggah. Anyway, he would ride his bicycle 40 or 50 miles an hour. I'm sure that's even possible, not being a professional rider. And he described once that he was on A1A with a group of riders, and the person in front of him, unfortunately, stopped. He went flying over this person, and he slid along the highway. And actually, it turned out to be he ripped all the skin off of his face, and he died. And in his death, in his death experience, he went and he claims that he saw Jesus. And Jesus showed him the world to come, and it was beautiful. And he wanted to stay there. And Jesus said, "No, you have to come back." So he opened up his eyes and looked into the face of an EMT who was dealing with the situation at that time. And they put him in the ambulance, and on the way to the hospital, he died a second time. And this time he said he saw God. And he said to God, I don't want to go back. They told me that my face is missing. And he actually showed me the scars on his face. So, and actually pretty good. But anyway, is that he said, God said, no, you have to go back. You have to live. And he came back. He died in the emergency room a third time that day. Okay. But every time he came back, and this is now, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 years later, and he still bike rides. So you could say this is just made up. But the minute that we say that there is the possibility that he, a part of his neshama, as we would call it, his soul was in another dimension. I talked about my my bike accident a number of times already. I'm not going to go through that. But the fact is that once we recognize, and what mysticism does is that there is more to life than we experience. And when we understand that we are finite creatures who, because we are able to think of these things just as Isaac Luria did and Chaim Vital did, that we are attached to something greater than we can ever imagine. And we're able to harness this energy in the Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. This is not a class in Jewish mysticism or Kabbalah. What I'm trying to point out today is, and when you leave here today, again, the question is, I'm trying to answer this question, each one of the classes we have in these 3 sessions is, okay, what did the rabbis believe in God? They simply, similar to the biblical point of view, that our belief in God is based upon what? Our experiences of God in our lives. God is with us for everything, or some people say, God will only give us as much as we can handle, right? Okay. God molds itself to each one of us and what we are going through. Number 1. Number 2 is there's only one God, and God is the creator of all and sustainer of all, and God does care about the system and the governance of it. Otherwise, the entire system falls apart. But then in Kabbalah, number 1 is what? Number 1 is we begin, as much as we can understand anything that I even told you this afternoon about this part, is that guess what? Number 1 is we can know more in depth about how God operates in the governance system. Kabbalah goes into great detail as to how the system, they think it works. Is it correct? Only God knows. Okay? But the fact is they have insights that the average human being does not have. Okay? And number 2 is, of course, they did believe, again, just like the rabbis, just like the biblical writers, just like the Torah people, the Kabbalists also believed in what? Why did God create this whole system? God was everything. God left room for itself. Then human beings came about in life and everything. And why? Because God wants to give his children, so to speak, the opportunity to create something greater than themselves, just like God, with Selim Elohim, created the image of God. And therefore, the whole system is really based upon a returning back to God what God gives us. That's the whole Kabbalist system. And how do we do that, of course, as Jews, is through a system of mitzvot. That's the Jewish law behavioral part. And so I hope this gives some sense of this part of Judaism the Kabbalistic way. What we're going to do next week is going to go, I'm skipping a large part of it, but much of Jewish thought, especially in the Middle Ages, dealt with, like last year when we studied Maimonides, dealt with simply how to live a Jewish life and not so much about all this thinking. Okay, how do you live a life as a Jew? Okay, as we learned last year, Maimonides, even though he was a great philosopher, his main concern was that, and others as well, many others. However, we're going to look at next week is we're going to look at an area which should be very interesting, and that is modern Jewish thinkers, such as Abraham Heschel, Martin Buber, Eugene Borowitz, and others, Mordechai Kaplan, the Reconstructionist movement, because these are modern Jews, just like we are, who again had to confront the idea of there is the beliefs and the concepts of God described by our ancestors, Torah, Bible, Rabbinic period, Kabbalistic period. There is this basis, but what do I do with this as a modern human being, dealing with a world that is very, very different than it was then. How do we do it? And you'll see each one of them takes the roots that we have in the Torah and comes up with different ways of viewing it, which eventually, as you'll see, my ending next week is going to be, guess what? What does that mean for us? Each one of us ultimately has to determine who God and what God is and when God is and where God is for each of us. That's what it comes down to. I cannot tell you this is God and this is what you got to believe, Michael. I can tell you my experience of God, but that's where I have to leave it. And I can tell you, as I've done these sessions, this is the biblical, this is the rabbinical, this is the Kabbalistic. But what you do with all of this, guess what? That's the beauty of Judaism. In Christianity, this is it. That's it, the catechism, okay? In Judaism, it's experiential. And that's the challenge. That makes it much more difficult, but to me, that makes it much more exciting. Because then guess what? It lives. It breathes. It is what? Evolves, exactly. And that to me is what is so exciting and beautiful. So everyone have a lovely, gorgeous beautiful South Florida day. And 7:30 tomorrow night, we're back again. Shalom, everyone. Peace.